Hey guys, welcome back to this video. Sorry, I have been a little bit quiet on the YouTube side of things for a couple weeks. I've got a couple short videos up, but it's been pretty quiet as far as me making music videos and collections videos and whatever else I do. But it's just been busy with work and, you know, trying to relax on the weekends, and these videos do take a bit of effort and time, so apologies for being a little bit slow and lazy on the video making, but I'm here this week to kind of fill some requests, and I've had, I think, as many as 3 people tell me that they have been waiting patiently for me to do a George Harrison video. So that's the topic of today's video theme, is to show my George Harrison collection, which is really nothing that special, to be honest with you. It's just very ordinary, if I'm being honest, but I thought in order to try to make this somewhat interesting, I would do what I did with my Paul McCartney video, and that was to do an album ranking. So I've taken his 10, I guess you could say, proper studio albums and done a ranking of them, at least as far as where I sit with it today. It could change, but you know, some of them probably wouldn't, but you know, it just like all good music, it does vary from moods and time and stages of life and all those things, so don't take it as gospel, but as it stands today, I have spent the last couple hours making notes, so you might see me veering off a little bit from time to time to try to reflect on those notes, but I thought it'd be good to do an album ranking like I did with Paul for George, and I didn't do it with John because I filmed that video on his birthday, if I recall, or maybe it was the anniversary of his death, but either way, I just didn't feel like it was appropriate to talk about anything critical regarding John at that time. So I may come back and do a John ranking at some point. Ringo, well, it'd be pretty pointless for me because I've only got about maybe a third of his studio albums, and frankly only really care for a couple of them, so I probably wouldn't do Ringo unless it was very far into the future, and as I said, things change, but you know, I grew up, I was a Paul fan, you know, first and foremost. I was very obsessed and considered Paul McCartney a hero. You know, I wanted to be Paul McCartney like so many young people do. So I was kind of late to come into George Harrison's solo work. You know, really, it's been probably the last 7 to 8 years that I've probably really taken the time to appreciate his solo stuff as much as it deserves. So I'm not as, you know, like the back of my hand familiar like I am with Paul's stuff, because I've lived that music, with that music for 30, 40 years, where this is, you know, just still, I guess you could say, fresh. But you know, maybe definitely less than a decade I've really known most of this stuff. Some of the stuff my parents had, but not that much. And well, we'll just get into it, and I'm just going to do the ranking. But I'm not as familiar with it as I am McCartney, but familiar enough where I feel like I can speak with some knowledge, and at least share with you my favorites, and do some sort of a ranking. So that's what we're going to do. Alright, so we're going to start at number 10. Now, I'm not including the first 2 albums, but we're going to talk about those maybe towards the latter part of the video. But I'm going to focus on the 10, I guess you could say, proper studio albums. So coming in at number 10, and I think this is pretty universally considered his one and only really bad album. Some people may like it, so I don't mean to offend when I say that, but I think overall the perception of Dark Horse from 1974 is not very well liked. It was his 5th studio album, released in December of 1974. Sometimes the head just wants to say what the mouth doesn't agree with. And really, I guess you could say this is, you know, really pretty universally not liked. In fact, it was a little bit hard for me. What I've done here with these is to come up with 3 of my favorite tracks from each album, so this doesn't drag on forever. Because I don't certainly want to sit here and do full-on reviews of every album. We'd be here for 3 hours. But it was a little bit tricky to find even 3 really good songs on this album. So, it was pretty much trashed by the critics, scathing reviews on this one too. It led to a very controversial and unsuccessful tour for George, where he suffered from laryngitis and had drug addiction problems, and had involvement from Shankar that people didn't understand. But it was kind of veering away from the formula that had led him to success the first 3 albums, and it's got a more soulful, funky feel to it, I guess you could say. The artwork is kind of interesting because it's featuring a 13-year-old George on the cover, back from his Liverpool Institute days. So I guess trying to find something redeeming about this record. Interesting artwork, at least, and the back cover is quite nice. I like that picture of George. But top songs on this one, I guess the title track Dark Horse is decent. Ding Dong Ding Dong was the second single released from this unsuccessful album, and then I put down as my 3rd favorite track I Don't Care Anymore. So again, not a very pleasant listen on this one. A lot of things wrong with it and not that many things right, but from here it gets a lot better. It's probably the only George Harrison album that I just really personally don't care for very much. So if this was anybody else, it probably wouldn't even be in my collection, but trying to be as complete as possible, with George, it belongs there. So it gets better. Number 9. Now this might cause a little bit of controversy because this album is, I guess you could say, a grower. I didn't care for it at all at first when I first heard it, but I've gotten to like it somewhat over the past couple years. And I had a hard time saying if this was going to be 8 or 9, because I guess I could easily flip-flop 8 and 9 depending on what day of the week it is or what mood I'm in. But for today, I'm putting number 9 at Troppo. This was George's 10th studio album, released in November of 1982, and it's different and it's eclectic and has a bit of an 80s feel to it. It would be George's first album in 5 years, so that's worth noting there. I think overall it's more of a miss than it is a hit. For me, it was also kind of received that way by the critics. It was very mixed critical reception on this one when it was released. It didn't do particularly well on the charts. I'm written here that it only reached number 108 in America, and it didn't chart at all in the UK, so this was kind of a down period for George. And maybe the album deserved a little bit better than that. It's not a bad album. I've shown you the one and only really, I consider, bad George album. This one still is pretty good, so I had no problem finding 3 songs that I like on here. And the top songs that I picked from this album are Wake Up My Love, Dream Away, and That's the Way It Goes. And I think I could probably find about 3 or 4 more that I really like on here, so it's not bad. And again, I could flip-flop this and the next one pretty easily. And the next one in the ranking is at number 8, comes from Extra Texture. And again, 8, 9, take your pick. It doesn't really matter that much, but for today's purposes, we'll put this one at number 8. This was the 6th studio album from George, released in October of 1975. And I really do like the die-cut cover on this one. I think this may have been exclusive to the American release. I think it did not come with a die-cut cover in the UK. This was the last album released under the Apple Corps label, so this was George's last album for Apple. And this one did come in a pretty favorable critical response, so this one kind of saw him being a little bit more of a return to form, I suppose you could say, from Dark Horse. So it was a big step up from the 5th album, but this one, I guess maybe why I put this one just slightly above the Troppo is because I really, really like the song You. So that was an easy choice for me, and one of George's better songs in my opinion, in his entire catalog. So that's probably why I picked this one above Troppo, because I really like the song You. And this album didn't really contain anything in the way of spiritual messages, which was unusual for George, because most of his albums can contain some sort of a message of positive Hindu messages and spiritual tone to them, and this is the one album that really doesn't have any of that. Not that that has anything to do with the ranking, but I think fans were ready for maybe a little bit of a break from that. The rest of the top songs I put, This Guitar Can't Keep Me From Crying. That's another very good song. and A Bit More of You, one of those very George songs that really no one else could pull off that but George Harrison. So those are my 3 picks from this one, from 1975's Extra Texture. Alright, so number 7 comes in with an album that was released in June of 1981. That's Somewhere in England. And again, my copies aren't special in any way. They're very ordinary, run-of-the-mill, not sealed or in shrink or anything, really, to be honest. They're just very ordinary copies that you could find very inexpensive anywhere. This was George's 9th studio album, again released in June of 1981. This is the first album to be released after the death of John Lennon, so that's noteworthy, and I think that some of the songs obviously reflect that, what people were going through, and, you know, as a childhood friend of George's, it was probably a very, very difficult album at times to make. This did have chart success as well, released, it peaked at number 13 in the US and number 11 in the UK, so about equal there. As far as success goes, again, pretty good critical response, pretty good fan response to this album. And my favorite songs on here are very obvious choices. All These Years Ago, I love that song. Again, one of George's very, very best songs, and worthy of, you know, such a, you know, important time in music history, you know, coming so soon after the death of John Lennon. And then Life Itself and Teardrops, also very, very good songs. So, pretty darn good album here, Somewhere in England, from 1981. So, that was a nice one here. This one here, I know some of my friends probably would rank this a little higher than me, but I'm coming in here. Oop, I'm out of order. I gotta be honest with you. I could not find either that, or I simply do not have. But I'm almost sure that I've seen it at some point. So it's either misfiled, or I just cannot find it, or some weird thing has happened and I just don't have it on vinyl. But it just seems so odd. Anyway, number 6. I'm showing you the CD, 1979, Self-Titled. Again, a very, very good album, so it's a little hard to rank some of these because they're all really pretty much on a level playing field, apart from a few. This was George's 8th studio album. I'm showing you the CD again because I either can't find or simply misplaced or don't have the vinyl record. But it is a great time to probably show you that this came out of a couple of different box sets. So this one here, I guess I'll go in order, even though this Self-Titled's in a different box, but this is the Apple Years box. I think this one came out in 2004. It's a very, very nice box set, and you know, there are detailed videos on this. I'm not going to go into detail about these box sets, but this is everything you'd ever need from George Harrison's Apple Years, and right here in this little box, including a very thick book and all of his studio releases under the Apple label at that time. So it's just a very, very nice box set. So there's that one, and then you've got the Dark Horse Years, which I think came out a decade later, maybe? I don't know, it was quite a few years later I think that they actually did this one, but I love how they connected them all together. They're very similar in design. I would say this one maybe is a little bit less liked on my end because these CDs have jewel cases as apart from the digipacks on the Apple Years. It's a very minor thing though, but again, it has a very similar type of book. And then you can see that I took the album out to show you that, because since I don't have the vinyl record, or can't find it, that's how the boxes, or the CDs sit in the box set here. So again, there are detailed videos on this. Some of my friends have made unboxing videos of these, so I'm not going to sit here and go into detail about every little thing on these box sets, but they're certainly worth having. All remastered, all very, very well done. Anyway, getting back to my album ranking, number 6, written during a very nice period of George's life. You know, he had just recently married Olivia, and he had recently fathered a son, Danny, so this was a very upbeat, happy album, and the songs reflect that. So it's nice to see George was at a very peaceful place and a very happy time of his life here. Peaked at number 14 in the US, which was quite nice. And I don't know what was going on in the UK, but it only reached number 39. So, you know, this maybe is a good time for me to comment a little bit about the lack of support of former Beatles at the time of release of some of the solo Beatles albums, because I was just absolutely shocked when I did the research for this video how poorly some of these solo Beatles albums performed in the UK. So as much love as there is right now, you know, posthumously and currently for solo Beatles and Beatles in the UK, it didn't happen instantly, and you guys were all a little bit harsh on solo Beatles stuff when it came out, and not just George, but all of them really. To see an album of this caliber only reaching number 39 in the UK, country that you know, should be very proud to have you know, had such a worldwide phenomenal talent like George Harrison is just almost shocking. Anyway, my top songs here are Blow Away. Absolutely love that song. I loved it as a kid. I love it now. Here Comes the Moon and Love Comes to Everyone. You know, you can see a kind of a theme in my favorite George Harrison songs. They all have a very distinctive George feel to them. And I guess that makes perfect sense because I really appreciate his softer side, and I appreciate his introspective lyrics, and I, you know, just he, you know, as far as all the Beatles are concerned, I think he was the one that probably is most like me. So maybe my favorite songs reflect in my personality a little bit more than someone else. So from there we go to number 5, and this was the one I was kind of leading up to that may surprise a few people because I'm not maybe as keen on it as a few others. Very good album though, so again, please don't take any of this out of context. But this was the posthumous release in 2002, about a year exactly after his death, Brainwashed. This was about a 10-year in the making record, so a lot of these songs had sat around and marinated for a very long time. And then after he had passed away in 2001 of throat cancer, you know, Jeff Lynne, who produced this alongside Danny Harrison, decided to finish, very rightfully so, the record, and I think they did a phenomenal job with it. This reached number 30 in the UK, again, the same comment as before for UK followers of solo Beatles albums. It's just almost shocking. Did a bit better in the US and hit number 20. Probably deserved, you know, if this was released today, all these years that past his death, I would say this would be a number 1 album because it's very, very good. And favorite tracks on this one are Any Road, that's probably the best song on the album, Stuck Inside a Cloud, and Looking for My Life. So again, songs that probably reflect me more than anything. So that's, you know, no shame in that, I suppose. Alright, I'm going to take this sheet down and move along here on my notes. Sorry, I have to follow along. There's a lot of information here, so I'm sure you can understand that I have to make a few notes, otherwise it's just going to be me rambling. Alright, number, what was that? Brainwash was 5. So number 4, again, maybe a surprise to people that I put this so high, but again, it's sentimental reasons. This was a family favorite when I was a kid. So I heard this album a lot. This is probably the album I was most familiar with before I started getting back into George about, you know, 7-8 years ago. And that is 1976's 33 1/3. This was a very successful album in America. This reached number 11 in the US, and again only number 35 in the UK, but I remember this album being pretty popular for quite some time. It seemed to last a while on the US charts, and it was a difficult album to make, actually. It was kind of a tough time because George was just starting out his Dark Horse label. This was the first release on Dark Horse. He was suffering from hepatitis at the time, so halfway through the album it was just a miserable health period for George. But yet it still produced a lot of good songs and a very enjoyable album. And again, I have very strong memories of this being, you know, very young, 10 to 15 years old, and my parents just absolutely loved this record. My top songs here are Crackerbox Palace, my mom's favorite George song, True Love, and See For Yourself I've listed as my 3 favorites. So very, very strong, somewhat sentimental feel for 33 1/3. But I am proud of that, and I don't mind whatsoever, because that's part of the enjoyment of music, is all the memories that are attached to it. Coming in at number 3 is the 1987 release, Cloud 9. Probably don't have to talk too much about this one. This was George's 11th studio album. It was came out after about a 5-year hiatus. Produced by Jeff Lynne. Did very, very well, both critically and commercially. It was a big comeback for George. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about Cloud 9. Most everyone who is even a moderate George Harrison fan would know this album pretty well. I would say my top 3 songs here, Got My Mind Set on You, When We Was Fab, and That's What It Takes, and pretty easy choices there again from me. So really, really fantastic album there from George. Alright, number 2, the rest is going to be kind of a no-brainer, because I think almost everybody's going to put these at least in the top 3, the number 1 being so predictable. But number 2 is 1973's Living in the Material World. This was the 4th studio album, released in June of 1973. This hit number 2 in the US and number 4 in the UK. Very much part of his early success post-Beatles. And what can you say? You know, this one tidbit I found online that was interesting is this replaced, in the US, this replaced Wings, Paul McCartney and Wings, Red Rose Speedway at number 1. So that was interesting that a Beatle replaced a former, you know, the Beatles exchanged number 1 albums back-to-back weeks in 1973, so that's kind of cool. Hit number 1 actually in the 2nd week of release, so that's pretty darn good, especially considering the charts were ranked much differently back then. Top songs here: Give Me Love, Give Me Peace on Earth. You know, who wouldn't love that song? One of the greatest songs ever written, really. Don't Let Me Wait Too Long, and That Is All. So again, songs that really reflect me 100%. This I probably need an upgrade copy, even though it's nice. It doesn't have a lot of ringwear. It does have a pretty good split here. But sounds nice, and you know, for me it's good enough. So I also like the labels on this. A very, very attractive looking album. Alright, and finally, no big surprise, the number 1 album for me in George's studio album ranking is All Things Must Pass. Here's an original copy from 1970 that I still play. You know, I love it. It still sounds amazing. I'm not going to take it out of the little sleeve and show you all this. This is a very well-known, loved, one of the greatest albums ever written. And, you know, I would say this is one of the greatest albums of all time. You know, I would say without too much hesitation that most people would put this as their favorite solo Beatles album of all 4 of the Beatles. Not everyone, of course, but I would say the majority of people probably would, and I'm among them. I would say that there isn't a better solo Beatles album than All Things Must Pass. It's pretty much a near flawless album. Yeah, so this was his 3rd studio album, if you're counting the 2 I'm going to talk about here in a second. Obviously, it had huge critical, huge commercial success. It was a long-standing number 1 and all over the world, and had that wall of sound type production that Phil Spector was famous for. That, you know, was just so well produced, and you know, it just almost seemed like this was a decade-long coming out party for George Harrison, that, you know, all these rejected Beatles songs and all this work that he had built up for years was finally getting out there. And it's almost, the whole album could be a hits package, and it really pretty much is. So, you know, what can I say about that hasn't already been said, other than I just am happy to be able to show you that I do have that Record Store Day reissue. I purchased this online much after the fact, and I got a reasonable price for it, and it's just, I think it was sealed, in fact, when I bought it. But I would say, you know, it really doesn't make any difference in sound that much. It's nice, it sounds good, it's clean, so you're guaranteed a clean copy when you get something like this, but there's all kinds of clean copies of the original, so I wouldn't pay the asking price that's currently going for this. I got it for about $100, but I think it probably commands a much higher price tag than that these days with the vinyl resurgence. So, you know, I would say just try to find yourself a nice condition, clean, original, or, you know, maybe you'll get lucky like I did and find this. A little bit controversial that they colorized the cover, but that was a decision George made before he died, so that was not done after the fact by the labels. He wanted it that way. He wanted there to be a differentiator between the original and the reissue, bringing color and life into it. I absolutely support that, and I have no issues with the redo of the cover. If you want the original cover, there's plenty of them out there. So, you know, I don't really get all the negativity regarding the changes on the cover. It was something he wanted to do, so who are we to say? Anyway, I'm proud to have that, and it's a very, very important part of my music collection. So from there, I just wanted to show you and talk briefly about a few things, and then spend a little bit of time. This is going to be a long video, I apologize. We all know that when I say that, like, that was his 3rd studio album, he had released 2 albums prior that really didn't get much attention until much later on. Wonderwall Music, which is important for me because it was the introduction of his Indian music and all the influences that he not only carried musically but throughout his life. I really, really enjoy this. If you enjoy classical Indian music, you will really like this album. This was really the first solo Beatles album of all time, of any of them. This was released in 1968. So this was released before the Beatles broke up by a long mile. And it just sounds so modern to me, as from somebody who really likes modern or classical Indian type influenced music. I mean, you think of a band that I dearly love like Dead Can Dance, I don't know if they would be in existence if it wasn't for albums like this one. So I did want to spend a little bit of time and talk about how good this album is. And if you like Indian music in any way, I would say this would be a great addition to your collection, and I actually play this quite a lot. I like it. Then in 1969, a year later, he released this album called Electronic Sound. Mixed feelings about this one. This was a basically 2 long tracks, mostly a Moog synthesizer, so it was a bit of an experimental album, an electronic experimental album on the very short-lived Zappo label, which was a division of Apple Records that didn't last very long. It's an interesting listen, but not one that I go back to very often, so I didn't want to include either one in the ranking because they're not really proper studio albums from George. They're in the box sets, so that might be the best way to pick those up, but they're interesting. I really, really like Wonderwall music. I would recommend that, but this one here I would say probably for the die-hard fans or completists like I am. I say I'm complete, I don't have the Self-Titled on vinyl, so I can't find it. I'm running out of time here, so I'm not going to be able to talk too long about Concert for Bangladesh, only to say that it was a very pioneering, first of its kind of Live Aid type benefit concert that was done for the, let me make sure I get this right, for the starving refugees of the Bangladesh Libertarian War at the time, 1971. This featured all kinds of famous musicians, including Eric Clapton, and was organized in part with Ravi Shankar and George Harrison in collaboration. Album came out about a year later. It did phenomenally well. It won Grammy Awards, and not much to show you there without taking it out and doing all that. These are a little bit hard to find in good condition. Mine is in very good playing condition, but it has some issues with the boxes. And that's what I find most about these, that are hard to find boxes that have some damage. As far as I know, this has never been reissued. Probably would be a great record store day item or something like that to put this out again for newer, younger fans who have never heard it. It's very, very, very good. And even though George's voice wasn't fantastic on it, there's enough good stuff on here that it's definitely a good listen and certainly worth having in your collection. What's next here I want to talk about? Well, I was going to talk a little bit about Live in Japan, but we're running out of time, so that's in the box set. It's a live CD. It is on vinyl. I don't have it. It's very expensive. Came out in 1992. I think it was Eric Clapton that convinced George to get back on the road and do something musical again, and that concert album and that tour and concert album reflected that. A Japanese tour, and it's quite good. I'd love to have the vinyl record, but again, it goes for a lot of money, so I don't have that. And then I want to talk briefly about this. This was a documentary that was done for television by Martin Scorsese, world-class, famous, Oscar-winning filmmaker, called Living in the Material World. It is phenomenal if you want to know more about George's life, and not only in the Beatles, but post-Beatles and his spiritual world, and it's got amazing, wonderful interviews from all the people that knew him best: Ringo, Paul, Olivia, Danny, and others, including Eric Idle and all of his friends, and he had loyal, wonderful friends throughout his life. This is a fantastic watch, and with that, there was an album that came out called Early Takes, which is quite interesting. It's very short. I wish it says Volume 1, and I hope there is someday maybe a Volume 2. But right now, as it stands, there is only the Volume 1, but it's certainly worth getting some early versions of some of his better-known songs and demos and whatnot, so it's definitely worth getting that. And then there is this beautiful hardbound book. If you're not a movie watcher, you might enjoy reading the book. And as you can see, this was done for HBO, and it's just wonderful. So however you go about it, to learn as much as you can about George Harrison, I would say watch the Blu-ray, DVD, or read the book. And it's certainly worth it, and I learned a lot watching that. So finally, just quickly, I just want to talk about a couple things I pulled out to show you. I have the Brainwashed little box set. This was a CD box set that came out at the time. It contained the CD in this nice digipack format, and then there was a couple of other odds and ends. There's a poster. Actually, still has the original receipt. I didn't buy it, and let's see what the date is on here. It's interesting. Here was well, hard to say. It looks like they had it on clearance at some point. Maybe it was originally $30, and there was a sale price on it. Anyway, can't read it. It's pretty well faded. But I kept it in there just as a novelty. What else do you get in here? You get a bonus CD, or maybe it's a DVD, but I hear that's got virtually nothing on it. You get a sticker. And I always loved the Dark Horse label. I just thought that was a phenomenal logo for Dark Horse, so I wish I had more of those. I'd stick one on my computer or something. Just some clippings that a fan had put in here who had it before me, so, you know, a review of the album, and just a few magazine clippings here that they kept with it, which I thought was quite nice. So I've kept it intact from the previous owner, and I don't know why they decided to sell it, but I'm happy to have it. It includes a poster, and I think it's pretty well complete. There may have been one other small item, maybe it was a guitar pick or something, but that's not in there. But overall, it was great. I got it for like $5, so neat little tidbit with the Brainwashed album. Of course, you all know George was in the Traveling Wilburys. I don't have time to go into detail about them. That'd probably be a whole separate video, but this is a great way to be introduced to the Traveling Wilburys. There's George there with Roy Orbison, Tom Petty, Jeff Lynne, Bob Dylan. They released really 2 proper studio albums, and then this set contains a third kind of outtakes and unreleased stuff and whatnot. But really, you probably only need the 1 album. I mean, it's volume 1 of the Wilburys that is phenomenal. Volume 2 is shaky, more Bob Dylan stuff, which isn't really my cup of tea as much, but it's still good. And oh, I'm sorry, it does have a DVD in here as well. I have not watched that. I should watch that. It's got the history of the Traveling Wilburys. I should take a look at that. But I tell you, I can never get tired of hearing Volume 1 of the Traveling Wilburys. It was so good. One of the real commercial peaks of George's entire career. And then finally, I wanted to spend just a little bit of time showing you this, because I don't ever see people talking about this at all when they're doing their George Harrison stuff. And this is a box set called Collaborations. And it was more or less produced, although George does play a little bit on these, off and on, not a lot. But this was more produced by George Harrison, and it's Indian music again, so I really, really like this. This is a beautiful set, and I wish I had more time to go into great detail on it, but let me just show you here. Let me just follow along so I don't waste your time. It contains 3 CDs, and let's see if I can get this open just real quick for you. It's a little bit tricky to open. Let's see if I can remember how to do that. So far I'm failing miserably. Okay, it's just magnetized on the side. But inside, I'm not going to be able to do a very good job of this with the camera angle I'm at. It comes with a certificate, numbered certificate of authenticity. And it comes with this beautiful hardbound book that you get that shows all kinds of pictures of Ravi Shankar and George Harrison and all the travels that they've done. It almost looks like real photographs in here. It's just so well put together. So you get this hardbound book, learning all about their stuff. And the most unique thing about this is these CDs come in replicas of the original vinyl records, because most of this stuff was only released originally on vinyl. The first CD is called Chants of India. Let's see if I get this right. Well, I think this is the first one. Chants of India here. This was released in let's see, recorded over 3 sessions, 2 in Madrid, India, and 1 in London. The music was composed by Ravi Shankar and produced by George Harrison. This album sold over 100,000 units in the US alone and has been out of license for over 5 years. So the cool thing about these is they all come in this replica of the original vinyl record little sleeve, so it's kind of nice that they've housed the CDs in these vinyl replica sleeves, so I really like that. Second one is a music festival from India. Just read my notes here again. George invited Ravi Shankar and 17 Indian classical musicians, composed by Ravi Shankar and recorded during a 5-week period in 1974. This album was produced by George Harrison. Only released originally on vinyl, has been unavailable for over 30 years, so it's very, very cool to hear this. And I think probably the only way, unless you have a very old record, that you could get your hands on. Again, they all have this information sheet inside, showing very well here, and they all come like this. Put it away after the video ends. And then the third one is Shankar Family and Friends. This is the third CD in here. Again, same format where you just pull it out and you get the CD. This is the first joint recording between George and Ravi Shankar, composed by Ravi Shankar and produced by George. One half of the album comprises instrumentals and songs, while the other half is ballads, as a ballet to a yet unstaged performance. This album was only released on vinyl and it has not been available again for 30 years, so it's just fantastic to get that. And then finally you get a DVD called The Music Festival of India. Rare, previously unreleased concert performance of Ravi Shankar's Music Festival from India, recorded in London's Royal Albert Hall in 1974. The DVD includes the concert film, separate concert audio, and a bonus features that include a 5.1 surround sound mix. So really, really well done, put together, and fans of Indian music, fans of Ravi Shankar, George Harrison. You know, the thing I wanted to spend enough time to really fully appreciate this box is because the spirituality, Hinduism, Indian music, it was such a big part of George's life that it would almost be wrong to not focus quite a bit of attention on that when you're talking about the legacy of George Harrison, because it was such an important part, and you learn about that a lot if you're not too familiar with in that living in the material world of DVD or book, that it was such an important part of his life. And while I'm not a religious person, and I don't really associate with religious affiliation at all, you do have to respect the fact that it was so important to George. And if you love George Harrison, you almost have to appreciate the fact that it was such a big influence on all that he did for a long period of time. This wasn't just later in life. This happened in the 60s when he was with the Beatles. So for him to stick with something that long and for it to be so important and always pertaining to everything that he touched, whether it was movie making or race car driving or music or whatever was important to George Harrison, this Indian influence, Hinduism, Ravi Shankar was always a big part of his life. So I thought it was appropriate to spend a fair bit of time talking about this beautiful box set. I don't think these are terribly expensive, so if you're interested at all, I would try to reach out and get a copy of this, because it's just very, very beautifully done. Okay, so I think I've covered it all. I've covered the Wilburys, I've covered the solo albums, I've covered the early stuff of Wonderwall and Electronic Sound, I've covered the Indian music and the box set. I hope I did George Harrison justice. Very important artist, one of the most influential artists of all time, and obviously being a former Beatle, you can't go too wrong. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I'm sorry for the length, but when you're talking about a legend like George Harrison, why not make it long? So thank you all for tuning in. Hope you have a wonderful weekend. I'll be back soon with something new and different. And until then, take care of yourselves, and bye for now.
Isn't it a pity? Some things take so long. But how do I explain? Not too many people can see